This is one of those weeks where there's news in the life of the world. In case you didn't know, there was an election on Tuesday, and you look at the readings for the coming Sunday and go, where am I going with this? I have to say, we've added insult to injury by the fact that during this 3-year cycle, as is our pattern, we have been, since Pentecost, think Memorial Day, through Thanksgiving, we have been following the semi-continuous readings. And so what that means is the gospel text is the gospel text we would get whatever. But the first reading and the psalm are not what we would normally read. They're from a separate lectionary. And they're awful in the context of this last week. I'm just going to sit in the awfulness for a minute, because it feels to me like, as Pastor Friederike and I were chatting this last week, that we are always going on and on and on about how the lectionary sometimes presents texts that we need to wrestle with, whether we want to wrestle with them or not. And so changing back to the other lessons felt a little bit like cheating. So, fasten your seatbelt. We're going to start with Ruth. So, Ruth and Naomi and Boaz, we've got this great cast of characters. So, Naomi had sons, and they all died. One of them was married to Ruth, and Ruth then worked her way through the other sons, because that's the pattern and culture and tradition. As to a woman who would become widowed, she would move to the house and home of the remaining male relatives. Well, the story quickly gets to the point where there are no remaining male relatives. And so Naomi moves back to her home country among her Jewish people. And Ruth curiously follows her. She's a Moabite. She is not Jewish in background. And instead of returning to maybe her own clan or tribe, she stays loyal to Naomi. So there's this heartwarming story that pivots on a Hebrew euphemism from the first reading that just doesn't translate in a way that conveys what's going on. We hear this in the story of Noah and in other places. So Boaz, being an upstanding citizen of the countryside there, is a farmer, and he's leaving an edge to his field like he is supposed to, so that the poor and needy can glean from the edge of his field. And he notices that his kinswoman, Naomi, is back and is in need of support. He's leaving a little extra edge there when he knows that Ruth is working in the field. So Boaz is already aware, but now we get today's good news gospel reading about Ruth and Naomi, where Naomi says, Ruth, I've got this idea. You're going to go late at night alone and visit this man in a place where nobody else is. Make sure you're wearing your best outfit, you're washed up, you've anointed yourself with perfume, and then you are to go in after he has had something to eat and uncover his feet. That's not what that Hebrew word means. It doesn't mean feet. Well, actually, literally, it means feet, but it's not what it means. I think in this last week, certainly in the last several years, we've been thinking of the rights and place of women in our society, and different times and places where there have been struggles, compromises made that seemingly only affect one gender and not the other. We wrestle with the rights and safety of women in our society. And this reading from Ruth, landing on an election where this was definitely one of the themes of the story, is kind of an awkward one. Now, I know you're thinking, I'm waiting for Pastor Matt's 30-second wrap-up of all of this and to make us feel good as we go out the door. And the answer is no. We're going to lay and flounder around in it for probably several years, or as we like to say in seminary, until Christ comes again. But it's fascinating to me that we would get this lectionary on this day. So, I think in 28 years of ministry, I probably have enough fingers to count the number of times that I spent quality time preaching on the psalm assigned from the day. But here's another one. Now, the psalm for today is a beautiful psalm in a lot of ways. We think of children as blessings, and certainly that is it. But there is a verse in this psalm that we read today that is something that is shared in Christian nationalist circles pretty extensively. They've got their own Wikipedia page, let alone websites and various things like this. It is the quiverful movement. Quiverful. It is where, as a Christian, you are extremely conservative, extremely interested in having as big a possible family as you could. Some of you perhaps remember the Duggar family, that 19 kids or whatever, the TV show. They are a part of this movement. You're prone to doing things like be angry at the government all the time, moving to Idaho and setting up large compounds and this kind of business. This needs just a quick word, I think, that first off, when Christian movements center Old Testament texts as their operating principle is not a good sign, because the next cut is Leviticus and any number of things. And as Christians, we follow, it's handily in the name, Christ. And so all of the gospel message should be coming out of the Gospels and the life and ministry of Christ. The other thing in our current political climate that makes me deeply uncomfortable with this expression, quiverful, is it's not basketful. It's not a wardrobe full. It is a reference to a weapon, something that is going to be used against someone else. And in a climate that is increasingly encouraging the idea that our neighbor is the enemy, this kind of language is unchristian. So, where to go from here? I'm on a roll. The gospel text. The gospel text that we have for today, chosen by me as we talk about stewardship, was not chosen by me, but is on the theme of stewardship, and is this being the second to last Sunday of regular Sundays. We get Christ the King coming at the end of the month. It's another lesson where Jesus is telling us to do things that we don't want to do. One of the things that I think is significant about the gospel text, Jesus is occupying the temple, and there are a lot of people who normally run the temple, including their own police and the leadership of the Jewish people, standing anxiously on the side saying, "So, you coming back tomorrow? Because we'd like to have you somewhere else." And Jesus is teaching. Jesus is teaching. And what you are having in this story is people bringing in big bags of money, and they're putting it in the treasury. But I want to draw out the story just a little bit. They go to the treasury when everybody is there. They don't go when it's quiet. They want to make sure everybody sees what they are putting into the treasury. They want everybody to hear the coins rattling as they go into the box. They want to make sure they are getting all of the credit for their vast generosity. Now, in our day and age, with wealth disparity greater than getting back to the era of the robber barons, the generosity displayed often, today and then, is often a small fraction of what that individual's capacity is to do something. Now, when the coins are done all their jingling in the box, they stand back and offer a prayer. And everybody's excited. And everybody is amazed at what they do. And they tell them so as they leave. Now, quietly, off to the side, a widow steps in. Now, from the first reading, we have Naomi as the widow. Curiously, the regularly assigned first reading is also about a widow during a time of famine. The idea of generosity towards others from a widow is staggering in the cultural context of the Gospels and the Old Testament. Social security for a widow was sons. That was social security. And so, in Naomi's case, she had none. She needed to seek out a kinsman that would support her. So in this case, when we have a widow roll in, she pulls out her giant bag that is silent of all of her money, looks into it, pulls out the 2 coins that are in there. And one of the things, even when I was young, hearing this story that is remarkable, is it seemed impossible to me that there would be a coin worth half a penny. It takes 2 of them to add up to a penny. And she places it in. There's no long prayer. Nobody notices. Except Jesus. Jesus notices the widow's action. This is a hard text because we often think of our own stewardship as kind of, we want to make an impact, right? We want to make a difference, and we want to know the scale of the need so that we can understand the scale of our response that would be appropriate relative to that need, as opposed to what our capacity is to be generous. We live in a world that maybe my kids picked up on, and this sharing is a nice way to take things from people. But Jesus, I think, at the end of this lectionary year, is reminding us that God has been generous towards us. And we are called to reflect that generosity to the world around us. So, I apologize to you for a rather disjointed sermon, but there were a number of things that needed speaking to today. Reflect in your heart your opportunity to be generous with your neighbor and others. I did want to mention at this point, because it felt related to me at least, often our generosity is a reflection of the sharing of those dear to us who have gone before us. And the display in the narthex is intended to help us remember loved ones who have died, parents and others, that we might put a ribbon into the wire there. We might write their name on a piece and hang it there. That will be up this entire month. So take a moment and reflect on those stories in your own life as well before you leave. Amen. Please stand as you are able.